Hello and welcome. On behalf of eDRV, the Council on Energy, Environment and Water, and BSCS Yamuna Private Limited, a warm welcome to today's webinar on utility managed EV charging in India. In today's event, we'll be discussing the results from an early pilot carried out in autumn of 2021, last year, by our three organizations. The project was supported by the United Kingdom Green Recovery Challenge Fund as part of its Enhancing Urban Mobility initiative. In today's event, we'll be discussing the early findings of the pilot, followed by a discussion on what managed charging means, what are some of the trends on the electric mobility transition in India, and what does all of this mean from the perspective of electricity distribution. I'd like to introduce today's presenters in the order that they will be speaking. First, we will be hearing from Mr. Simon Ball, who will be providing us with a keynote address. Simon is a Senior Program Manager at the United Kingdom Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. Next, we'll have a presentation by Mr. Dhruv Warrior. Dhruv is a research analyst at the Council on Energy, Environment and Water. And Dhruv will be introducing the project. He'll talk about the concept of utility managed EV charging and also talk about some examples of international best practice. Next, we'll have an informal panel discussion with participants, Mr. Mukesh Dadich, who is representing our third partner, BYPL today. Mukesh is the Head of Sustainability and Clean Tech at BYPL. We'll also hear from Ms. Saloni Jain. Saloni is Research Analyst at CEEW. And my name is Bhaskar. I'll be your host today, and I'll also moderate the discussion. We'll make sure that there is enough time towards the end for questions. So as we go through the event, as questions come up, please feel free to send them through to the chat function. Okay, so I guess it looks like more than half of the attendees call or think of themselves as medium. So they follow the space closely, they're interested, and hopefully they'll learn something new in today's event. Perfect. So this is great. Then, without much more ado, let me then turn over to Simon for a keynote address. Right after that, we'll hear straight from Dhruv, who will talk about the project, and then we'll launch into the discussion thereafter. So Simon, over to you.
Great, thanks, Bhaskar, and hello to everybody. It's really great to be here, and thank you to the eDRV team and the partners for inviting me along today. As mentioned, my name is Simon Ball, and I'm part of the UK's Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and I'm one of the quite large team that's helping to manage UK PACT, which is Partnering for Accelerated Climate Transitions, which funds this project, and more specifically, I'm the Asia lead for the Green Recovery Challenge Fund part of that program, which this project was identified through. So before I go into more detail on the program, I really want to say how exciting it is to be able to be part of this and see some of the excellent work and hear about all the excellent work that our partners have been doing. I've been part of this program for quite a long time, about 3 years since its inception. So it's really great to finally start to see some of the achievements and results coming in. So really great to hear about what's going on. So UK PACT is one of the UK's key climate-related capacity building programs, and it's provides support to a large number of ODA-eligible countries, those with high emissions reductions potential, and those that are striving to overcome the barriers to clean growth and who want to accelerate their climate change mitigation efforts. The program was established back in 2018, and its key reasoning was to test a new demand-led delivery model that would help support the delivery of Paris Agreement commitments from 2015. The program has 3 components, and those components, which include the Green Recovery Challenge Fund, from which I'm part of, work together to agilely meet country and regional demand via a variety of mechanisms to make sure that we're really able to meet and provide support to the demand that countries have. This project that's being discussed today was funded, as I said, by the Green Recovery Challenge Fund. And this part is a fund which works thematically to support low carbon transitions, as well as supporting green, resilient and inclusive economic recovery from the pandemic. And we deliver this fund in partnership with ICF Consulting, who are the key delivery partner here and have been doing excellent work over the past couple of years. So work on the GRCF, as we call it, began back in early 2020. And then during the COVID-19 pandemic, we kept going and we began our search for projects. And we really wanted bold ideas that addressed specific low carbon challenges and ideas that were creative, innovative, and ultimately that could be scalable, and ideas that would promote gender equality and social inclusion particularly, and would inspire future programs to really drive ambition at scale. And out of that, one of the key low carbon challenges that we identified and that we went with was electrifying urban mobility and considering climate within the transport sector. And a funding window was launched back in September 2020, and from which this project was identified. And electrifying urban mobility was chosen because the transport sector is such a major emitter of greenhouse gas emissions and is responsible as well for high levels of air pollution, especially in urban areas. And there is really a need for more sustainable patterns of transport to provide cleaner air, lower emissions, and particularly that in densely populated and polluted cities, which has been our focus. So through that, we now have 6 projects that are being funded by UK PACT's Green Recovery Challenge Fund, totaling at just under £3 million across India, Indonesia, Bangladesh, and Thailand. And in addition to the work that this project is doing, we have projects, for example, working on creating roadmaps and frameworks to support the adoption of electric mobility in public transport in Kakinada. We've got projects that are creating action plans to scale up e-buses, particularly in Jakarta, Indonesia. And in Bangladesh, we've got a project which is developing financing tools and business models to enable the scale up of EV uptake across the country. So really exciting stuff that's going on and lots of work happening. As I mentioned before, the program has multiple components. So it's quite a bit larger than sort of what I've described. And the program actually has around 20 active projects in this space, EVs alone, working across Asia, Latin America, and Sub-Saharan Africa. I won't go into details on them all, but I really would implore you to have a look at the UK PACT website, which I'm happy to put in the chat after I've spoken, where there's lots of details on all the projects that we're funding across all the components of the program. I finally wanted to really touch upon gender equality and social inclusion and why UK PACT has really sought to embed GESI into everything it's doing. And as we move forward, governments, as like ourselves, companies, organizations around the world are really beginning to realize how greater diversity can drive innovative solutions to tackling climate change. And that's so important to what we're doing. And UK PACT's primary objectives are to reduce emissions and by doing so, support the reduction of poverty. However, we're only going to be successful in doing that and achieving those objectives if the outcomes of reducing emissions are inclusive and equitable. And as I'm many sure of you are aware, climate change really does disproportionately impact women, girls, marginalized groups and communities. And it's these inequalities that we really need to work to identify and challenge in order to overcome these challenges that we've got and to lead to equitable development, which helps mitigate against the effects of climate change. And for the Green Recovery Challenge Fund, with fantastic support, I have to say, from ICF Consulting, who have really been a really key part in driving the ambition of the program. This has meant, for example, the introduction of GESI assessments for all of our partners. So our partners go away and assess the kind of GESI elements of their programs. They've created action plans and have constant project monitoring to ensure that our partners are considering and planning and taking GESI into account. And I have to say, we've seen real drive and ambition from our partners who are really beginning to see the benefits, and we're seeing some really great stuff coming from this side of things. So I don't want to take up too much of your time, and just to finish, just really wanted to reiterate how great it is to be part of this, and so exciting to see the stuff coming out of the projects, and really looking forward to hearing all the details and being part of the rest of the webinar. So thanks for your time, and I'll hand back to Bhaskar. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, hi folks. So I will just share my screen now. Just tell me when it's visible. Yeah. Yes, I hope this is visible to everyone.
We can see it.
Okay, great. Yeah. Hi folks, welcome to today's webinar My name is Dhruv Warrior. I'm a research analyst with CEEW CEF, and I'll be presenting to you introducing utility-led managed EV charging in India. So I'm from CEW, among India's leading not-for-profit policy research institutions. CEW uses data, integrated analysis, and strategic outreach to explain and change the use, reuse, and misuse of resources. CEW has 7 focus areas and 1 Center for Energy Finance. Regarding today's project is a collaboration between CEW, eDRV, and BSES Yamuna, and has been supported by the UK PACT Green Recovery Challenge Fund. So coming to the question that a lot of you will be having today, what is managed charging? So by definition, managed charging is a form of vehicle grid integration through central or consumer control of EV charging. What does this mean? Well, during charging, vehicles draw power from the grid, and it is possible to both change the rate of charging as well change the time that charging is being done. And this umbrella term is brought under the terminology of managed charging. Just for your information, this is distinct from V2G or vehicle to grid, which is a form of vehicle grid integration where power is sent from the vehicle back to the grid. Now, while we use managed charging as a broad umbrella term, managed charging is actually divided into 2 quite discrete types of load control. One is passive managed charging, where using behavioral load control by changing charging behavior using incentive and price signals. So that means that utilities are able to coax consumers and convince them to change their charging behavior by either using price signals or different kinds of incentives. This is quite distinct from active managed charging, where utilities control the load directly using communication signals sent to vehicle telematics or to the charger. This gives the utility a lot more fidelity in its ability to change the rate of charging or change how charging is done, but requires a lot more smart charging infrastructure at the location of the consumer. Now, that's fine, all well and good, what managed charging is, but the question is, why are we talking about managed charging today? First of all, because EV charging should be managed. So there's already a lot of literature out there where we know that EV ownership will put new demands on the grid, increasing demand for electricity. Also, left unmanaged, this might entail provisioning of expensive and carbon-intensive energy. Not only this, EV charging is also distributed unevenly, which means both spatially as well as looking at it in terms of a time function, which means that EV charging is very often synchronized with existing peak load hours. Left unmanaged, this will greatly increase the need for transmission and distribution investment. So that means that you have more expensive power and you have a need for greater infrastructure investment. That is why EV charging should be managed, but also EV charging can be managed. So that's because EV charging is a lot more flexible than other loads on the grid, especially because during EV charging, a lot of EVs spend some of their session idling, which means connected but not drawing power because their batteries are fully charged. And this is particularly true for night charging sessions, when most of these vehicles are left by the owners till the next morning where they are unplugged. Also, many charging stations in vehicles come with load control functionality built in. This means that they are already pre-equipped to be able to control the load that they draw from the grid. So that is why managed charging should be part of our conversation. Given these facts, we as CEW, eDRV, and BSES Yamuna undertook a pilot managed charging project in Delhi, which was supported by UK PACT. The pilot was essentially 2 3-wheeler charging hubs and 1 4-wheeler charging station. And what we tried to achieve through the pilot was to understand the flexibility that BYPL could be afforded through managed charging, and also the associated economic value when managed charging was conducted. The project attained level 2 GESI compliance as per UK PAC guidelines. We were able to reach out to women stakeholders as well as stakeholders from economically weaker groups and implement a lot of these findings in our recommendations to industry and policy stakeholders. So what were the results from our pilot? Well, first of all, we did a basic market scoping research, and we saw that we were able to look at the average load curve in Delhi. And that itself provides some level of understanding of where managed charging could provide some benefit to the grid. So if we look at the load curve at the moment, we can see that there is a separate summer and winter load curve. And the summer load curve is defined by two peaks, one around 2 to 4 and the next around 10 to 12. Now, while these peaks exist, this is still an average, and it might be more, it might help to see what it looks like when summer load curves are at their extreme. And what we see is that during certain times of the day, the load on the grid increases quite drastically. And this is especially true again around 2 to 4 and 10 to 12. What we are seeing is that if given current trends, the number of EVs deployed increases by 250,000 e-two-wheeler, three-wheelers and 50,000 e-four-wheelers, that would entail an increase of load on the grid of about 450 megawatt. Now, this is only with slow charging connections. If any of these e-four-wheelers have fast charging connections, that increases the load even more. And given that already there is this form of peak that is visible on the grid, if load starts building up on top of this peak, that will just require even more infrastructure investment and will also force utilities to start having to procure power from short-term markets. Given now that we've spoken about short-term markets, let's have a look at what the short-term markets look like for Delhi over the last 3 years. So this is the summer curve of costs in the short-term markets. And as you can see, there is a particular increase in costs around the evening between 10 to around 12. And that cost of power goes up to close to 5 INR per kilowatt hour. What we see is that if we are able to shift this load from around 10 to close to 4 a.m., that reduces the cost by around 2.1 rupees. And over a year, shifting just a 100 megawatt load from here to here, which is about a 1 hour shift because you would shift 9 to 10 to 4 to 5, what you would see is about 7.8 crore or $1 million of savings annually. And similar data points are visible for the winter curve as well. Now, that's the market scoping. We also had a chance to look at the data coming from our vehicles. And what we saw was that the potential for managed charging varied quite drastically depending on the time that we charged it. So this is what the charging patterns look like at the two charging hubs during their peak utilization. And what we see is that there's essentially an afternoon session and a night session. And so during the afternoon, vehicles come in, plug, and then unplug. And then similarly, vehicles come in the night, plug in, and then unplug all through the morning. These sessions act differently from each other. And so we can see the number of vehicles that are connected. These are the number of vehicles that connect through the day. And what we realized is that the vehicles that come in the afternoon very often don't idle a lot. And so the flexibility available is quite low. But when we look at the night charging session, around 2 to 6, the number of vehicles that are simply idling and connected without drawing load increases quite a bit. And so what we see is that between 4 to 6, most of the vehicles connected are actually not drawing power. And that explains why even though the number of vehicles connected is constant, the load actually drops off. And this is where our opportunity lies. If we are able to shift loads from the peak hours between 10 to 12 and shift them to 4 to 6, we will be able to reduce the cost as well as reduce possible potential infrastructure spending. Finally, we were able to see that the amount of time that this flexibility is possible is different for the afternoon and the night. In most cases, the afternoon sessions, most sessions from all our pilot experiments, the idling time was close to quarter of an hour or at max half an hour. So that really gives the utility only a window for really necessary flexibility. But it doesn't allow load shifting. On the other hand, more than 50% of all sessions in the night had idle times more than 2 hours, which provides the utility a chance to shift their load by 1 to 2 hours in the night from this 10 to 12 slot into the off-peak slots 2 to 4 or even further later. Yeah. So thank you. That was basically our preliminary findings. I hope we are able to go further into what we found in the experiment, and also if this was useful, we can speak more about what our findings could lead into in terms of future experiments. Thank you.
Thank you, Dhruv, for that presentation, and thank you also, Simon, for your address. I believe we have a couple of questions for you. Okay, so we have a question going up for polls. It is, what is the most important benefit that you might consider, that might make you consider purchasing an electric vehicle? Is it low emissions, lower operating cost, more power, or something else? And if you choose something else, please go ahead and type in the chat window what that other factor is. Maybe we can give ourselves 30 seconds to respond. And you can choose more than one answer, by the way. So I'm going to choose low emissions and more power. All right, the answers are coming in. We see lower operating cost as the slight winning choice here, with low emissions being actually quite an important criteria as well for folks. And let's see if anybody has answered anything else in terms of other criteria not listed here. Maybe not. Okay, let's go to our second poll question then, and I think it should be going up in a minute. And all right, so what are your major concerns with electric vehicles currently? Is it the fact that they are expensive to purchase, that they have a low range, that you have a limited amount of charging infrastructure, or lack of choice from the OEMs, or again, another reason that you think is a major concern? So if you choose other, please type in the chat window what you think that reason is. Okay, so I guess most respondents believe that the cost is a barrier, as understandable. Although the good news is the battery prices have been falling, and in a couple of years, more and more sectors are expected to reach price parity. But charging infrastructure is not so close, but somewhat a distant second. I'm actually happy to see this, because it definitely feels like this answer has evolved in the last 12 to 18 months. I would hazard a guess that if we'd asked this question a year ago or 2 years ago, that percentage may have been a little bit higher. Low range, of course, remains an issue, and lack of choice is also a factor that folks have listed. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for those responses. Just for those of you who've just joined us, we will welcome you. Let me just quickly recap the event that we've had so far. Today's event is being recorded, so if you miss the beginning, you can always catch up later, and we'll be sending across the link. If you have any questions, please submit them by clicking on the questions button on the bottom right. We will have moderated questions, and they'll be shared with the discussants later on in the event. So without much further ado, let me then just open up for the discussion. Let me start off with saying the writing is on the wall. India's transition towards EVs is gaining momentum, and I think it's quite clear to see. I think we've seen in the answers today the concerns around climate change, cost, air pollution, energy security. All of these are major drivers for why EVs are very quickly becoming the obvious future for mobility in India. According to a study by the CEEW Centre of Energy and Finance, electric mobility is projected to become a $206 billion market opportunity. And just last month, well, at the end of last year, you saw that Indian EV sales for the first time crossed 50,000 units. Excuse me. with 2.76 million EVs sold. And what that means in terms of the total penetration now is where India is kind of hitting the 2-3% first cusp of transition, where it's not very uncommon to see EVs on the road, and you're really starting to see adoption, at least in key segments, and I think more to follow. Keeping these trends in mind, it's clear that EV industry has also shown a lot of resilience, and although cost remains a barrier, it has significantly been addressed, especially if you see some of the recent push on the policy side. For example, the finance minister announced in the budget that there are specific policy measures being put in place for battery swapping, and interoperability is being prioritized in India's recent budget. And special allocations have also been made for charging infrastructure. So you're seeing the likes of ESL and other national and regional charging operators basically picking up the starting the work of rolling out EV charging infrastructure now. And then lastly, there's campaigns like Switch Delhi, which are also helping to create awareness within people, and also address the concerns or misunderstandings around EV charging. So without then sort of taking much more time, I think I'd like to turn over to Mr. Dadich. So Pukeshji, you've just heard from Dhruv about some of the preliminary findings, but if I can roll back to, say, a year ago, what were, from your perspective, some of the reasons why BYPL initially became concerned around e-mobility? What were some of the challenges you could foresee that led you to think about embarking upon this project for managed charging?
Yeah, thank you, Bhaskar, and thank you, Dhruv, for that wonderful findings and wonderful presentation today evening. So, Bhaskar, you just mentioned about government coming out with some sort of budget proposals for battery swapping and interoperability, standardization of batteries like that. So, let me first congratulate you and your team that you have done tremendous work already on this interoperability part along with CEW, and we are happy that we were also part of that great work. And the cognizance of that work has been taken by Government of India, and they have included this part. Certainly, this battery swapping and standardization of batteries is the key going forward in more proliferation of EV batteries and EV vehicles as well. So coming from that point, from the policy push and the subsidy and all regulatory frameworks, all are aligned to provide greater push towards adoption of EV in India. As we all know that our dependency on imported oil is very, very high, and the intention of the government is clear cut to reduce that dependency. And this could only be done especially towards in mobility sector through more and more number of adoption of e-vehicles. And we know as a utility this fact that this is going to be in a big way, and the demand which will be coming to the network, grids, transformers, cables, and all these things will be very, very difficult to handle. And that's why this was the reason around 3-4 years back that we commissioned a study whether we are ready in terms of serving that kind of emerging load at different clusters in our area. Our network is able to provide that kind of reliability which we are having today. And also we have to look for the overall power purchase prices and other associated operational cost as well, because everything has to be transferred into tariff if we talk about the Indian regulatory regime. So we were aware of about this fact, and we conducted this study by PRDC where we got some insights how this EV story is going to take shape in India, and what should be the preparation of utilities in terms of handling and integration of the EV load. So believe me that the conventional approach of designing the network just to fetch the peak load data and designing your network just to cater that peak load, which hardly comes at 0.5% of the time in the whole year, and investing and designing everything is not going to work anymore in the future. And this additional load of EV, and when I talk especially about my utility or any other utility operating in metro cities, then obviously our additional EV or emerging EV load will definitely going to coincide with the peak load. So as Dhruv mentioned that during summer months we have two peaks of exactly maybe almost similar peak. One is around 4 p.m. in the daytime, and another one is around midnight, 11 to 12 midnight. So definitely there are concern, issues, challenges in meeting the peak, and that too for the very short time period. Therefore, considering the fact that EV load, which has come to some extent because we already have more than 1,000 number of e-rickshaw connections in our area, and the public charging stations are also increasing at rapid phase. So we believe that there has to be some wired or non-wired solution to address this issue or challenges in coming times. So definitely managed charging is the ray of hope for utilities operating like us, which mostly operate in congested areas. So unlimited expansion of lines, transformer, and other things is not possible for us because Delhi is already a landlocked area and you hardly get any space for augmenting or expansion of our network. So what other modes are available just to meet the consumer or peak load of that 0.5% of the time? Definitely there comes the role of managed charging. That's why we were very interested and excited to do this project. And I especially told Bhaskar to include the e-rickshaw part as well, because that is the load I believe that is contributing towards my evening peak, because that is more than 12 megawatt of size presently, and I believe that in next couple of years it will be crossing 50 megawatt. And in Delhi, our projections are that in next 3 years the total EV load will be more than 400 megawatt coming just because of the EV induction, because Delhi transport sector is coming in a big way. The electric buses has already started to come in, and the DTC is applying for big bulk charging station connection, and around 200 megawatt of load will be purely for electric bus charging, both for DTC and the metro feeder buses as well. So we were quite interested and excited to do this project, and we had some level of hypothecation and assumptions before starting this study, and I'm happy to share with all the teams and all present here that most of these assumptions have been verified through some data in this study. So yes, this load can be managed in effective manner without affecting the comfort and the business of the user, as we have done in e-rickshaw charging centers. When an e-rickshaw owner comes in the morning and sees its e-rickshaw, it should be fully charged. He is not bothered when it was charged, whether his supply was switched off between 11 to 12 o'clock or 12 to 1 o'clock. He's not bothered about that. His only concern is that he should get his rickshaw fully charged when he comes to that charging station to take it away for doing his business or like that. And I believe that we were able to successfully demonstrate this capability of shifting the peak load from the peak hours to the non-peak hours, especially that morning hours of 3 to 5 a.m. and like so. As part of four-wheeler as well, it was successfully demonstrated, and I am eagerly waiting for the detailed report to have a detailed look on the data and the analysis. CEW team has done tremendous work towards this, and one or two companies has been associated in this task. So great work, Bhaskar and CEW team, and I congratulate to you. And I am sure that this report and demonstration and exercise will greatly help to the utilities like us in addressing the issues and challenges which we are going to face or started to face due to emerging EV load. So thank you, Bhaskar.
Thank you so much for your kind words, Mukeshji. I think you had a lot of interesting points in there around the growth trends, specifically on the three-wheeler side, four-wheeler, which is still limited, but I think growing very quickly now. And I think the point about the heavy-duty vehicles becoming now a big part of the FAME policy, as well as the push on the public transport side, is going to be a major aspect. I wanted to turn to you, Saloni, and ask a question. You were a part of the research team at CEEW. I wanted to ask you two questions. One, based on sort of your work on the regulatory aspects and some of the policy challenges for managed charging, what were your findings? And I think Mukesh, you alluded to some of the behavioral aspects of what does the driver want. So I'd love for you, Saloni, to speak a little bit to what were the behavioral challenges the CEEW team experienced while trying to implement the three-wheeler pilot.
Right, Bhaskar. So I'll say that during the course of the pilot, which we did in the month of October, November 2021, we faced a bit of there are technical, regulatory barriers together. So from the technical perspective per se, for example, what we felt that the charging infrastructure needs to be whole lot smarter. And currently, like the three-wheeler charging hubs that was there, they were using conventional plugs for charging, but with that is mostly dumb charging, and it does not allow data sharing. So yes, smart chargers or smart charging plugs would be needed for understanding the user profile better. Apart from that, there was also any successful managed charging strategy would require understanding of data, that which is what you pointed out, that understanding of the charging behavior of consumer, so that less obtrusive managed charging strategy could be designed, which could then lead to more benefits accruing to them. So yes, but then again, availability of data, or say, for example, if say smart meters or advanced metering infrastructure could be one way to address that concerns around data. And also if you see around different geographies in India would have different EV demand, and they also have different RE in their power mix. So essentially what we need is more granular level understanding of these charging patterns in different geographies, so that utilities or others can determine a managed charging strategy which could be beneficial for all stakeholders.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And then let me turn to you, Simon. Maybe based on what you've heard as part of this project, and then also looking at some of the other projects in other parts of Southeast Asia and Asia, as well as the United Kingdom itself, wherein you're now seeing for the first time monthly sales have now surpassed 20-25% being electric. So clearly in certain segments, far ahead. In other segments like two-wheelers, three-wheelers, which may not be very relevant. How do you kind of compare and contrast maybe some of these aspects and what have been maybe learnings from other areas that come to mind that you could share?
Thanks. So I wouldn't call myself an expert in this area, but I guess, yeah, you're right, Bhaskar, in terms of particularly compared to the UK, where it's much more sort of the four-wheeler side of things. And it is stuff that I think we're still trying to consider. And I would say from a UK perspective, a lot of the challenges, I guess, are the same. And I think, and sort of into one of your questions that you put into the poll, the kind of charging infrastructure, I think, is still a thing that we're trying to deal with here, and even less so with public transport. I think the sort of public transport side of things, it's starting to come into place, and sort of private vehicles, the infrastructure still doesn't exist, but is starting to build, and you can really see, and I particularly have noticed it over the past kind of year, 2 years, that the kind of EV space has grown massively, and there's a lot more EVs on the road, and then there's a lot more charging points, and they're all starting to come into place, and you can see it starting to progress. But I still think there is a long way to go. And then across our kind of other projects doing sort of similar work, and a lot of it has focused on public transport, and seeing the same sort of issues, or making sure that everything's in place to ensure that the charging infrastructure is there and that it works. But as well as that, I think that's always been kind of maybe thought of as a bit of a secondary point, because there's lots of our work is kind of focused on thinking about, okay, how do we implement EVs and get EVs into the space? But there's always a part of the work that's like, okay, we've got the EVs there, and now we need to think about, okay, how does the infrastructure work, and how do we make sure the charging works, and make sure that it's equitable to everyone, and it's in the right places, and I think that kind of touches on the kind of Jesse side of angle that we've always trying to focus on with the program, in that we want to be able to, it's right to be thinking about this, but also thinking about it, okay, we have this infrastructure and we're thinking about the loads, etc. But we need to make sure that that infrastructure works for everybody, and that everybody can access it, and that the charging stations are in place. And that kind of side of things as well. So that's a real focus of ours, and kind of key reflections that I've seen to date. Yeah.
Perfect. Thanks so much. Yeah, Simon, you mentioned the Jesse aspect, and maybe if I can come back to you, Saloni, and ask a little bit more, because again, speaking on behalf of the entire project team, we saw that as I shouldn't say unusual, but normally in grants or activities, we're very pleased to see the almost central focus on the Jesse theme with respect to every single deliverable, every aspect of the project. I want to ask you, Saloni, if you would share a little bit about how did the team kind of translate those considerations of gender equality and marginalized groups into something as dry as policy for tariffs and technical issues of protocols and managing EV charging. So yeah, please.
Yes, so I think the Jesse element here is, it was actually very interesting to work at, and especially and during our placing gender at the middle of something that is, so technical, and in a way excludes lot of women and marginalized communities it brought about some interesting insights. So basically, how I would place it is that during the course of this project, we reached out to a few women EV drivers, and via a survey, and at the same time we also interacted with a few three-wheeler drivers during the pilot. What we found is that that perhaps the benefits of managed charging that we are talking about in terms of, say, tariff reduction for the user may not directly reach the user, and may not directly be passed on to the user, in the sense that it may just be limited to to the CPOs, and then it depends on CPO whether they pass on to the end user or not. So again, increasing competition there can overcome this barrier, and in a way it could lead them to pass on the benefits to the end users as well. Another thing that was pointed out during the survey was that safety concerns around charging, accessing public charging station, especially during the night time and the early morning hours. So in future, when a managed charging program, or event based managed charging program is designed, perhaps these things could be taken into consideration, and probably daytime events could be more beneficial as opposed to a nighttime active managed charging event. In doing so, for here again, we would need data with respect to how do women charge their, at what time during the day do women charge their vehicles, and more. So for example, if it is somewhere in the afternoon when a woman goes out to pick her kids from the school, then perhaps that would be the time when she can also access the public charging stations, and therefore when a managed charging event based managed charging is done, perhaps she could participate and be included in this entire process. Then there was this third point that I want to raise, was that access to smartphones should not be the central element to accessing or knowing about interventions like managed charging. So I mean, in a way that yes, awareness drives would be needed, awareness drives that could explain to the end user. So for example, say a e-rickshaw driver, or other marginalized community, so that they could participate in it, and just having a notification on the phone might not give them that much a nudge, where when an awareness kind of drive could probably include them more in this process, and in the EV space for sure.
Thank you, Saloni. Bukeshji, I want to come back to you, maybe picking up threads of what Simon said and also what Saloni said. Now, if you imagine, the demand response overall, or demand management from an industrial or commercial and industry perspective, the experience that utilities such as BYPL have had with that. Now, if you then translate that to EV charging, which is more personal, consumer driven, and to an extent, fleets and heavy duty vehicles driven, what, in your perspective, are sort of some of the challenges that you have, like as a utility, like what needs to change in terms of regulation? How can EV drivers be incentivized? Like, what, in your view, would be something that works specifically with an Indian context? Based on what you've seen, not just for three-wheelers but also others.
Yeah, so definitely these measures have to be on ground to protect the interest of utility, and in turn of the consumers, so that they continue to get reliable and quality power supply. So in Delhi and at different places in India, we have TOU already in place. In Delhi, we have this time of use tariff or time of day tariff for any consumer having 10 kilowatt or more load in any category. So automatically the EV consumers of having more than 10 kilowatt load is automatically covered under that. And that to have plus minus 20% of the band of the base tariff. So we are also proposing and discussing this thing with the regulator to keep some of the component on dynamic basis as well, because these are announced on at least on year ahead basis, and taking some clue based on the past performance and past load data and other things. While at the real time, there are different factors due to which the load supply scenario and network congestion and other things could be altered, and That's why we are thinking that there should be some dynamic element along with that TOU as well, so that any sort of elasticity, price elasticity or demand elasticity can be utilized effectively in that case. It is not necessary that whenever is peak hours are declared by DERC, I am really facing that kind of challenge of peak hours, because again, in Delhi, weather is also uncertain during, especially during monsoon days. So even if it is peak hours and if we get showers, then the demand will drastically reduce the demand. So in that particular case, we may not like to have that kind of plus 20% of the tariff, and we should be allowed to reduce that maybe at minus 20 or even below that. Similarly, at times, especially during winter nights, where there is heavy underdraw from the grid, in absence of required load, then we have to encourage the use of load during particular time period of night. So there could be, then again, we can introduce the dynamic element of TOU there, that the prices or the tariff can be slashed to the lowest possible point during that point of time. And that's where the role of managed EV charging and that kind of supporting solutions and comes, so that not only the utility saves something on part of that, but the customer should also gain out of that. Until unless that is educated and awareness is there, is not probably or not equipped enough, then there is no point in introducing TOU if he is not able to capitalize that opportunity. So this kind of smart solution, whether in form of smart plugs or managed EV charging stations, or maybe a different combination of solutions, scheduler and other things, are very, very important going forward, to just to support the TOU tariff and other things as well. We have already one managed EV charging station on ground, and I'm happy to share that that is the first of its kind in India, where the output of that charging station will be throttled by taking signals from the respective distribution transformer loading and also the real-time energy exchange power prices. So based on certain logics, the prices of tariff of the particular stations, the service charge will be determined, and also the load could be regulated in effective manner. And once we have a large number of stations operating on the same philosophy, then in aggregated manner, we will be definitely able to provide big relief to not only to the network, but also can avoid pressure on the power purchase price. And similarly, with what we have done in case of e-rickshaw charging stations, Bhaskar, I can draw similar analogy with the bus charging stations as well. The only difference here is that here the e-rickshaw charging center is having 40 kilowatt of load, and while that big bulk charging center for e-bus depot will be having in megawatt, couple of megawatt load. So going forward, it will be very interesting to look, and a similar pattern is there. The buses will come around 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. there, and will be rested there or parked there for the whole night. And again, they will start their journey early in the morning at 7 or 8. So how to choose that is best 6 hours out of available window of 8 to 10 hours to charge the bus, so that there is no extra pressure on the grid and also on the power prices. So that will be an interesting concept. So we need some sort of regulatory framework and policy push towards having some sort of managed charging arrangement at these bulk charging stations, because this kind of one charging station can provide relief equal to around 100 number of e-rickshaw charging centers. So we can save on part of hardware and other things while not affecting the comfort or business of and the operators anywhere. And so these are some of the things. We are also doing some project in the field of B2G, that is essentially the battery to grid type of, where we will be soon having a battery swapping station and at times when the demand will not be there from the vehicle side for the battery, and if batteries are in charge condition and the grid demands, then the battery power of the battery can be pushed back to the grid to support the grid. So that kind of innovative ideas and solutions are definitely going to help us, and also for the betterment of that particular section who's relying on the business of e-rickshaw operation, that battery swapping stations are going to help them in a big way to boost their business, because it will be taking less time. It is not necessary that you will have to park your vehicle for 3 hours or 4 hours and compromise or that reduce your business opportunities there. So you just come, replace your batteries, and go for another round of your trip. So we are seriously thinking on this because that provide me the opportunity of some sort of demand response, and also the smoothing of load curve, because direct vehicle charging vis-a-vis the battery charging have a lot of differences in terms of charging cycles and management of load and other things. So we believe that the charging of batteries could be regulated to some extent rather than the direct vehicle charging. So we are doing a lot of stuff around. So we hope that the supporting regulations and policy will be soon on the ground, where we will be incentivizing our consumers towards participation in any sort of demand response program and supporting the grid. So, and even we can have that ancillary service regulation on ground as well, where some aggregators can also play their role and combine or aggregate the flexibility available in form of energy storage, solar rooftop, manage EV charging stations, and they can sell this flexibility in the energy markets as well, and also take advantage of arbitrage time of use tariff. So it's a win-win situation for all stakeholders, including utility, consumer, aggregators, the policymakers, regulators, because regulators will be happy if utility are able to cut down the cost and try to keep this tariff under control, which is in most of the cases is the political compulsion in India, as Bhaskar, you know that. So these are some of the aspects around how we are thinking the whole gamut of EV charging going forward, and we are hopeful that the think tanks and the developers and solution providers and the research institutes like CEEW and eDRV will be helping us in finding some solutions and analyzing the things, and providing us right kind of supporting infrastructure and solutions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mukherjee. Just again picking up from that, turning to you, Saloni, just a question that we've talked a fair bit about the policy side, the behavioral side. I guess one aspect we didn't touch upon a lot, and Dhruv talked about it a little bit in his framing presentation, which was technology. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts about based on the research, based on the work of CEEW creating the EV charging dashboard, which is kind of aggregating a lot of information, CEEW's other work on interoperability and roaming. If you could speak a little bit to what is the role of standards, and what does that mean for India, and things like two-wheeler charging, battery swapping. India is at the forefront for a lot of these technologies. There are no global standards that are easily adoptable for this. I'd love to hear your comments.
Yeah, in my opinion, I think standardization of communication protocols and also the regulatory standards, which recently a finance minister mentioned about in terms of interoperability for battery swapping, would be key to encourage more EV adoption. I think that is that is where that a lot of anxiety and a lot of future problems that may happen could be addressed. So yeah, I mean, it's like we have, I mean, that it maybe it is important to, in a way, future proof the EV ecosystem, the standardization of protocols and others. And in terms of infrastructure for smart chargers per se, I think that again is key to all the it would be key to making EVs a grid resource. So I think that is something that could be looked at in a more mission mode way, as opposed to something that can happen by the way. So yeah.
Perfect. And then I'm just looking at the clock, so we're nearly at time. So maybe time for one or two more questions. If anyone in the audience has questions, please share them by typing it out below, and we'll try to touch upon it. Maybe while I have the mic, I would say the only remaining aspect that we didn't hear about, and I'll open the floor to anyone, Saloni, Simon, or Mr. Dadich, is the financing part. Because of course, we heard that in the audience poll, everybody said that the biggest barrier was the cost of the electric vehicle, and that remains a challenge not just for the end consumer, it is also a challenge for businesses. Now, of course, EVs have a lower operating cost, so in the longer term, it evens out, but the upfront barrier is still one to be surmounted, and not a trivial one. Would anybody like to jump in with any reactions or comments on how that can be cracked?
Yeah, Bhaskar. So we can see from the last couple of years that government is trying to and moving in that direction to have some sort of price parity between the conventional ICE engine vehicles and EV vehicles, while providing subsidy and support to EV vehicles, and at the same time increasing the taxes and duties on the conventional vehicles. So if government continues in that direction, and the second aspect is that the battery prices still falling. Maybe for the last 6 months or so, we can have a different trend, but ultimately the prices of batteries are going to fall, and that will be the big booster for towards reduction of EV vehicles. So because around 40 to 45% of the cost of entire EV vehicle goes towards this battery, and every 5 to 6 years, or depending on the number of charging cycles, you will have to replace that. So definitely the cost of ownership is going down day by day for the and the amount of competition we are seeing, the new and increased number of OEMs are coming into this EV manufacturing field. And believe me that today itself we are having around more than 2 months of waiting period for the two-wheelers for certain models, whether it is from Hero or Ola or anybody else. So there is definitely demand, and this price factor is probably not acting to that extent which we are seeing the things, because people are excited towards having that kind of different kind of experience. And this whole aspect of providing promotional tariff towards the start of EV journey by the regulators is also going to play a big role, because you get around 2 rupees or 3 rupees lesser price per unit for EV charging vis-a-vis your normal domestic bill or non-domestic or industrial type of tariff. So all sorts of promotions are there from the policy. We can see on the supply side as well, there are different PLI schemes announced by government, and there could be some more concessions and other things in terms of dedicated parking space, and some concession on toll and other things for especially for EV vehicles. So overall the environment for EV is very, very conducive, and I find no reason that the price is going to be any sort of barrier in coming days. So maybe in 1 year down the line, we can say that the price was the myth, behind this whole thing, and the cost of ownership of and this EV is not as high as we were thinking.
Yeah, that's a great insight to have, and I think I completely agree with you that the policy push has been a big driver. If you see leading markets like Norway, here in the Netherlands, in the United Kingdom, also in India increasingly, the big bite has already been taken out of the price, the initial price, whether it's through fiscal incentives, upfront subsidies or whatever. And I think increasingly also now we're seeing more and more announcements from banks, and in fact even dedicated business models like leasing companies catering to only EV leases. If you look at companies like LeasePlan, one of the largest leasing companies, they have made very aggressive targets for largely switching their portfolio to EVs, both in India and also internationally. So I think that's an important takeaway, Mukeshji. So we have two more questions from the audience, and after that we can wrap up with a final poll question. So the first question we have is from Martin, which I think maybe we have touched upon different parts, but I'll open it up to Saloni, Mukeshji, or Simon to respond. And the question is, what are some of India's EV charging pain points, and how would EV charging sector be best designed to suit the Indian market? So I think we've kind of touched upon various parts of that, but if anybody wanted to comment on the question from Martin.
Yeah, Bhaskar. So I believe we have discussed the different issues and challenges, especially from the power sector perspective and distribution perspective. What could be the potential issues going forward while integrating more number of EV vehicles and EV load? So on the one hand, we have these issues and challenges, and on the second hand, we have the solutions as well, because the technology and the solution part is developing parallelly, and it may come before the actual issue or challenges come. So we are sure that as a utility, we will be able to serve that load in a more efficient and reliable manner, and at this point from the network congestion or maybe from the DR integration side or monitoring of this thing, we don't see any challenge. However, again, coming to, although the government has announced something regarding the interoperability and data sharing, so we feel that a big amount of work is required to be done towards onboarding of OEMs to accept this particular thing, and also the regular data exchange between the grid operators, utility, and charge point operators, so that everything goes as per planned. Because the current day grids may be designed to behave in a manner which is not suitable to the disturbances beyond a certain limit, and we don't have any kind of history as far as EV load fluctuations and load patterns and load behavior is concerned. So India is a new market for EV, and if we have right kind of tools and solution to address these issues, I don't think that there are going to be big challenges or any issues for utilities or power sector in all.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And then the final question, the question on a lot of people's minds is this week's budget. So again, Saloni, Mukeshji, Simon, if you wanted to comment on, again, I think a lot has been spoken about, the right direction in terms of policy making, the focus on data sharing, the focus on interoperability standards, funding, but any specific remarks on this week's budget? Hearing none, I will then, we'll leave that there then. Okay, so it's almost time to close. So we have one final question for the audience, and I will request Charit and Arjun to throw that up. And that question is, let's see, having heard what you heard today, you heard from Dhruv, what is managed charging? Why is it important? You heard from Mr. Dadich, what does this mean for the utility? What are some of the barriers, some of the potential? You heard from Saloni. So putting all of this together and putting on your own hat as a potential driver of EV or a business, buyer of EVs, would you consider allowing your distribution utility to manage the rate of charging your electric vehicle? So let us now put on our consumer hats or end user hats, and would we be interested or willing to participate in this, given what we've heard about the benefits? So let's take 30 seconds to respond. So the answers are coming in, and I see a bit of a mixed bag. I see a closed eye sort of between being able to have the ability to override. So basically being able to communicate to the distribution company, to the charging point operator, that there are times when it may be an emergency and the user can override it. And savings, of course, savings being a tie-up with the usage not being affected. So this is really interesting. So it definitely sounds like there is potential for managed EV charging, but there are constraints, there are considerations both on the technical side, policy side, as well as the user side. So with that, let me close today's discussion, and I want to say thank you so much to Simon, Mukeshji, and Saloni. This has been a very exciting project for us at eDRV, one of our very first international projects, and also to be working with well-established institutions. It's been a lovely partnership, and if you would like to learn more about the project and also our ongoing work on either interoperability or managed charging, please follow CEEW Centre for Energy Finance and eDRV and BYPL. And once again, have a lovely day. And thank you so much for joining. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Bhaskar, Simon, and Saloni, and all the participants joining today's session. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Same.